first.
To the left, he's phone 15, is it GCSEs?
Oh.
Yeah, so that's what
We're waiting for Councillor Champion. I haven't heard that he's not coming. But
He's on his way, he's stuck in traffic.
It's stuck in traffic at the bus.
9:30.
Do you want me to give him a quick call, Jackie?
Yeah, if he's still like 2 minutes away, yes, but otherwise I think we do need to start if it's not going on.
Does that mean
The lovely Leonie's on the train.
okay? Okay, thank you very much for coming to the planning committee this morning. As you can see, there's only one major item on their planning application, but before that, we'll run through the agenda. First one is apologies.
Chair, we've had apologies from councillors Vivian Thomas and Vaughan Thomas, and we understand that Councillor Champion is on his way.
Okay, brilliant. Declarations of interest, anyone? No, thank you very much. Move on to minutes. Minutes of the last meeting. Do we agree they're correct record for people who are here?
Yep.
Yep, thank you very much. So we move on to the planned applications. And there's only one, which is Magdalen Street. And if we ask the planning officer to go through the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So the one item for you this morning is number 20 Magdalen Street. There are two applications here that we're considering at the same time. There's a full planning application and a listed building consent application. Both applications deal with the replacements and alterations to the existing shopfront, and the listed building consent application also deals with the installation of a suspended ceiling. 20 Magdalen Street is located on the west side of Magdalen Street. It's a ground floor retail unit. At some point in its history, it's incorporated 20A, so it's effectively two bits of shopfront and retail unit behind it. To take you straight through to the plans, this plan shows the existing view. So the shop, or the building itself rather, is one of the older remaining buildings on Magdalen Street, which obviously has a very lengthy and varied history. This shopfront largely has remained intact in much of its original form, which is to say its timber shopfront and glazing is rather old. There are bits and pieces that have been tweaked over the years. I think there's a couple of bits from the works that were carried out to Magdalen Street in the 1960s, for example. But just to show you, this shows the layout, footprint of the shopfront in its traditional original form, and then this is obviously elevation. So before I show you the proposed views, the journey to this point, I haven't got the plans on here, but there were plans that were submitted originally that were for very much a wholesale replacement of the shopfront that would have resulted in it having a much more contemporary appearance, that would have removed lots of the original fabric, for example. Following consultation with our conservation team, we decided that was not a very good idea. Indeed, we collected 3 objections from members of the public on that basis. So they had objected to the original plans. We haven't received any further objections following the consideration of the revised plans, which are these. So you can note that the layout and footprint of the shopfront remains unchanged, and what we're actually looking at is very much a retention of as much of the original shopfront as possible. There will be some parts that may ultimately need replacing due to their condition. The obvious one to note would be the awnings. They obviously deteriorate somewhat quicker than timbers, but having worked collaboratively with our conservation officer, there's a scheme that we now have in place that aims to retain as much of the original historic fabric and thus retaining the original overall appearance within the historic setting of Magdalen Street, which is in the city centre conservation area and is also within one of our retail areas, so it's of some significance, this site. This photograph shows the shop front. This was taken earlier this year, so I guess many people will be familiar with this either from walking Magdalen Street or passing on the bus. It's certainly definitely got lots of features that are much older than many of the neighbouring shops that have unfortunately been messed around with over the years. And then there's just some detailed photographs that show the condition. So as you can imagine, when considering the original plans, we straight away thought, well, let's make sure that there are things that could be preserved before we're deciding that the removal is acceptable. So it's certainly needing some work, but these pictures, I think, show you that there's certainly life left in much of the historic fabric of the shopfront that remains. Internally, we discovered during the visit that a suspended ceiling had been fitted to the retail unit. Our conservation officer has decided that that wasn't particularly harmful, and it may, in fact, provide some benefits in terms of preserving the historic fabric of the ceiling. Indeed, this shop is to be taken on by a business called Desh, who previously operated out of the former Barclays Bank site at the top end of Magdalen Street and part of the Anglia Square part of the site. So we've got an existing local business chomping at the bit to get in there and opening up and bring this unit back to life. So the recommendation, therefore, is to approve both the full planning application and the listed building consent application. There are a number of conditions that we would apply which predominantly relate to the way the works would be carried out to the historic fabric of the building. So they're fairly straightforward and standard and should ensure that things are done as we would like and to a suitable standard. So the recommendation is to approve both applications.
Did you mention the second?
Oh, and so I should have mentioned this right at the beginning. There was updates at the beginning, which is just to note that the description of the applications as they were written in the agenda is slightly inaccurate. So the full planning application, the full description should read alterations to shopfront including the new doorway and windows. The listed building consent application should read alterations to shopfront including a new doorway, windows and suspended ceiling. The proposal as it's written in the agenda refers to new signage. We would require separate advertisement consent application to be submitted to us to deal with any new signage.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions to the officer? We've got no speakers today. Councillor Sayles.
Thank you, Chair. I can remember going back a few years, we had another site along this road came forward, which has been repainted in an incorrect palette of colours, and certainly I would say these colours are not in keeping with the heritage palette. So all the upgraded exterior follow a palette of acceptable colours for this area.
Yeah, so that's something the conservation officer has looked at and considered. So the finish is as shown in the plans. So it's a grey colour paint that don't know if it exactly fits in the recommended or the guidance palette that we provide sometimes, but ultimately the conservation officer has looked at this in detail and determined that the chosen colour is acceptable within this setup.
Okay, is the flat still there, what's at the back, where the house wall?
Yeah, so there's the original older building, because it's based around one of the old yards that still exist on Magdalen Street, so it's number 4.
And you
Behind.
entrance off the yard, is it?
You enter from the yard, yeah, so there's a gate, I think it's straight next to 22 there, so, and then there's also, I think there's an access from the car park behind, which is obviously not the best view of the property, but yeah.
But no entrance into the shop?
There's not an entrance into the shop, no. So many years ago that arrangement has changed. So you know we're looking at a site here that's got you know well over 100 years.
Councillor Stupney?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thanks for the report. I'm reading this as a partial restoration of the shop front. Was a full restoration not possible? So, for example, plywood sections being part of the replacement, is that a suitable material? And why couldn't we use, or why couldn't the developer use an original material, original timber?
So as part of the assessment of the proposals, a full heritage assessment and survey excuse me, of the historic fabric of the shopfront was carried out by the applicant, that was then considered by our conservation officer. And much of what you would see in the in this photograph, for example, is to be retained. That there's only very limited bits that are to be replaced, is my understanding. Obviously, as works go on, it might be that things are discovered that need to be changed. But the materials proposed are considered to be acceptable in conservation and heritage terms. As I mentioned earlier, the only really obvious ones that we know are definitely going to be replaced are the awnings. But in terms of the historic fabric of the timber and the glazing, most of what is seen in the photo there is expected to be able to be repaired and therefore retained.
Councillor Colbert?
A question about the suspended ceiling. So essentially, we don't have pictures, no?
We have a picture, yeah. And it's not in the application. It's literally a photograph of a ceiling. So,
So my question is it appropriate to the ceiling's obviously an original feature which we value? Is it appropriate to cover it in the knowledge that at some point in the future it can be re-exposed? Could you talk more about that?
That's roughly the idea, yeah. So ideally, it wouldn't have happened ahead of us giving a consent. It's been carried out, so obviously there are other bits of legislation and requirements that property owners have to work to. So it makes sense, I think, and there may be some requirements in terms of fire safety, for example. Our conservation officer has taken the view that, given that this is going to be a shop with chiller cabinets and other bits of equipment that will may result in harm being caused through their use, the preservation that these suspended ceilings provide, or the suspended ceiling provides rather, is of some benefit. And the way that the works have been carried out, we're satisfied that they've been done to a good enough standard for us to not be concerned with. So yes, it's possible that we would rather have a nice ceiling in view, but the work that has been done already we don't consider to be significantly harmful or problematic in terms of the overall appearance of the building. And we've concluded there are some benefits to it being in place in terms of its longer term preservation.
Helen?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering, do you know to what extent the proposed works would improve the energy efficiency of the building?
We don't have any details of any energy efficiency. I mean, one would expect that where windows and glazing and so on are being improved, that hopefully that would improve thermal efficiency. But we haven't been considering any direct proposals here relating to the energy efficiency of the building. So it's very much just the replacement of the shop front and the ceiling for the listed building consent that we're looking at. So there isn't anything in the application that directly is accessible in that respect.
Okay, thank you very much. There's no more questions. Recommendation, Councillor Price?
Yeah, sorry. I have looked at the papers, and we're talking about a new shop front, new doorway. I can't see any difference between the two pictures. And please, I know I must be stupid because no one else is flagging it. So if you can show me how these two drawings differ, where the essential differences are. I'm sorry.
No, so that's correct. So the original plans did involve much more significant changes in that respect. So the original description has carried through, but in effect, what we're showing to you is that we've ended up with much of a like-for-like replacement or repair of the existing shopfront. So the superseded plans would have shown something that's quite different to what's being proposed, that we deem to not be acceptable due to its harm to the building and the wider setting of the conservation area.
Can I just add to that? If the building were not listed, we wouldn't need a planning application for this. Because it's a listed building, we need to obviously think much more carefully about the minute details and protect as much of the historic fabric as possible, which is why we still have an application. But if the building were not listed, then the application would be unnecessary.
Councillor Price?
Yeah, so can I just check exactly what we're agreeing with here? So the proposal is not to, it sounds like we're agreeing an additional doorway or a change of doorway. And if there's not much change, can you actually specify what's being changed? You're talking about some timber change, but it doesn't seem like that there is a agreed protocol to what is or isn't coming out. So it sounds like we're leaving a lot of space. And as I say, what I've read here is that we are agreeing potential door changes, but perhaps I've misread what we're actually agreeing, because if we're just saying, oh, well, there's actually hardly any change, then the application should say hardly any change, not another doorway. So can you just explain that for me, because obviously I need to
To New Zealand.
Yeah, so these are the existing plans, which show the detail of the shop front. In terms of what we're approving, we are approving what's on the proposed plans. So that is exactly what the applicant should be repairing and replacing where needed in accordance with. So there isn't a new doorway. That, as I say, has carried through from the original description, which the original plans did include much more severe changes. In terms of exactly what is to be replaced where necessary, that would be that we don't have exactly precise details of what's needing to be replaced, because that will be determined to a certain extent as work goes on. But what we do have, that our conservation officer has considered, is an assessment of the historic fabric of the building. So in effect, everything that's there has been appraised as best as can be at this stage. And my understanding is that the vast majority of the timber is expected to be retained and repaired, bar a very small amount that is beyond repair. The obvious one that I've mentioned that I know is definitely being replaced is the awning, for example. So the description is a bit misleading, but that's because it's referring to what was originally proposed. So on the file of the superseded plans that are viewable, that show that we would end up with something that would have looked like a 20th century kind of, or 21st century, I suppose, shop front. It would have looked quite different to this. So in terms of what we're approving, it's exactly what is seen on the plans in terms of where the doors are and so on, and the exact layout of the shop front.
You have another question?
Yeah, so just to come back, because I am new to planning, Chair, and so you're saying that what we're actually agreeing today is not this title 00191F where it says including new doorway and windows, because that's not what's happening, even though it says it. We're agreeing what is the detail on the plan in front of us today, okay, and so by agreeing this does not give them entitlement to put in a new doorway and windows. Why isn't that sort of changed? Do we need to put a condition in to make sure that is legally fulfilled? Or it seems very odd to be agreeing a new doorway when in fact you're saying we're not agreeing a new
That's a
doorway.
description.
And I don't want us to be, open to challenging that.
So in reality, when the proposal's changed, we should have taken out new doorway from the description. We can change the description whilst we have it. And this description has actually changed since we originally received the application. We can do that if the committee would ask us to. I would ask that the committee ask us to do that because it would help it would clarify it for the applicant. But if we were to approve with this description, but we had those plans, you're correct, they would not have permission to actually replace the doorway because it's the plans that we're approving. The decision notice sets out in accordance with plans, and we would list those there. And so we wouldn't be at risk of it, but it's just helpful for clarification to have the description match up.
So if we take that out, suddenly we could have a different door there.
I don't think we would be at risk of that, but it would be helpful if the committee asked us to change the description.
Committee?
Chair, I think that would be a good idea because I think if we were agreeing a planning application that says new doorway, even though the plans don't say it, a future owner may kind of reference that and want to put a doorway in. So I would support that, Chair, if the committee is minded to.
Okay, I'm going to abstain because I think if we take that out, they could actually do the door and change it themselves. I think the other way round.
No, I think it's the other way around.
Because they input in planning commission reports, they can just do it.
They would need separate consent to do that. They would need listed building consent at least to do that in future. So
Okay.
yeah.
All those in favour?
Of removing that, Chair?
Yeah.
Agree.
That's unanimous.
Yeah.
Okay.
So who seconded that, please?
I did.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Price again?
Thank you, Chair. I was just, again, very new to this. I just want to talk about the representations, the issues raised, just see if officers can just satisfy. Heritage, issues raised. Heritage shopfront should be maintained, made a feature of, and not removed. Part of the Norwich over the water project. Key contributor to character of the area. Removal of shopfront would be harmful to this area. So, just confirming that we're not having any removal. It's just restoration. Yeah. Proposed designs not in keeping with the character of the area. Could you elaborate on how you squared away that one? I mean, I know it's in the report, but if you for the benefit of
So the three representations received were received in respect of the original plans. So those objections don't relate to these plans. Each of the objectors was written to individually when the revised plans and the additional information, including the assessment of the historic fabric, were received. So each of those objectors was written to individually, inviting them to submit further comments. So they had the ability to continue to object or to change their minds, perhaps, or simply to comment. So no further representations were received following that. So we've taken the view that the revised plans are hopefully addressing the concerns that were raised in terms of how the shopfront impacts on the historic setting of Magdalen Street and the Norwich over the water project that's referred to in one of them. So we're confident that no news is good news in that respect. If people aren't telling us things are bad, then it's often the case that people are hopefully happy and they're not choosing to tell us. They've obviously remained on the file because they haven't been formally removed, and that's why we're presenting the plans to you today for consideration.
Thank you.
Councillor Stupid.
Thank you. Yes, one more question. Was the suspended ceiling installed by the current applicant or previous tenant, please?
I believe it was by the current owners of the building. So they've owned the building for some time. So they have everything for their business to commence in place, I believe, other than their permissions from us. So in terms of our assessment of the suspended ceiling, that's been carried out directly with our conservation officer who's visited the site and looked in detail at exactly how it's been installed and so on. So we're pretty comfortable with the work that's happened, and we're happy to approve the proposals on that basis.
Okay, the application is to approve, but I will move that. We've got a second of that. Thank you. Discussions, anyone? Councillor Stupid.
Yes, thank you. I think this is an example of how the process should work, and the result here is a good compromise, perhaps even an improvement on what we've got, and some long-term protection of the building. However, given that the applicant has already made alterations without permission, and they should know the permission in a building of this type and status, I would advise some close scrutiny as the work progresses. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'll carry the roll to the bill. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Do we need to vote on both separate applications?
And
We've got two separate applications.
the application, so which one have we just built on? The listed bit?
That's up to you.
Okay, let's get
Just to clarify, you've got two applications, you've got a planning application and a listed building consent.
Okay, well I think we just agreed the planning one.
Okay.
So we'll go for the listed one. All those in favour, please show. And that's unanimous as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much. There is a bit of training to have done.
Our visitors today